There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another Friday Reads, and I'm in a bit of a tizzy here because this is the third location I've tried in this little natural area, and I can't sit in the sun. But when I preview the video, I can transfer it from my iPhone over to the iPad. It looks so dark, but maybe, I don't care, maybe. I'm filming it a lot later than I usually do, so I'm not kind of used to dealing with the noon sun somehow, I don't know. Anyway, it will be what it will be. I have lots of news. I have more news maybe than book stuff to talk about, although I've got a fair amount of book stuff to talk about. I'm in a great space. Life is beautiful. So you saw that I was in Edmonton. I kept it a secret because I'm really childish that way. Lindy said, do we really have to keep this a secret? I said, can we please? So you've seen those videos. You might have seen them. They're there for your viewing pleasure. And I had such a great time. Lindy was such a lovely host. Her sweetie, Lori, was away, so it was just Lindy and I and her little puppy Joni and her big beautiful gray cat, Frida. Lindy was a marvelous host. I ate delicious vegetarian food. Oh my God, she just wined and dined me, and we had a little lesbian party. I was the honorary gay male member of that party with one of my subscribers, Katie, and her partner, who I won't name because I haven't asked for permission, over at Lindy's, and that was just so fun. It was just one of the most exhilarating evenings of socializing that I've had since I came back to Canada. And we went to so many bookstores, so I talked a little bit about the bookstores, and I'm not going to say very much more here, but the highlight really of the bookstore crawl that lasted 2 days, like I arrived in town on Thursday, and Lindy and I did those bookstores that I mentioned last week. And then Saturday, when we did the handover to my friends Brent and Tim, we went to the Glass Bookshop, which is owned by a former, very famous booktuber, Jason Purcell. They have just an incredible shop, and I met them. In fact, I thought I wasn't going to introduce myself to them because I'm a shy guy. And for some reason, I just assumed they would be, not want to talk to a fat, aging booktuber. Jason did one of my tags, my page 112 tag years ago, and that's the only contact we ever had. But I watched them interact with other customers, and they're so warm and friendly that why wouldn't I introduce myself? So I went and talked to Jason for a few minutes, and they were really warm and lovely. By the way, Jason has a book of poetry out called Swollening. I've recently acquired it. Didn't think to take it to Edmonton to get them to sign it, but anyway, look forward to reading it. And yeah, Jason was a big sweetheart. And then another used bookstore. Was it only one other used bookstore? God, so many bookstores I went to. And came home with a big stack of books, which will gradually show up on Patreon for my book hauls, which is, if you don't know, that's where all my book hauls are now, if you were wondering what happened to them. It was just a really wonderful time. My friends Brent and Tim are very dear friends of mine from the gay community. Brent was my first love. We had a kind of a tumultuous relationship in the late 80s that only lasted about 5 months, but it was my first love, and it didn't work out, and I was heartbroken, and within a few years we became really close friends and have continued to be. We have just an irreplaceable friendship. And Tim is his husband, and they've been, I can't remember. It's just a god-awful long time. I think they got together as a couple 25 years ago. Is that right? I don't know. 20 years ago, and they've been married for 15, something like that. And they're a great couple, and they treated me like a queen, and I was quite happy to be treated thusly. So it was a wonderful weekend. The only snafu happened on the way home. I took the bus, the Greyhound bus throughout Western Canada. I don't know why they closed their business a few years ago, but they did. And now some other private bus companies have sprung up. I found out that I could get from Saskatoon to Edmonton by bus just by Googling it, and everybody I told was shocked. There's a bus? What? And I took it, and it was great. It was cheap and comfortable, and a new bus. Felt like, it was really, really good. But we stopped in a little town on the way home for 20 minutes. And the bus driver, and I was wearing my headphones, I was listening to an audiobook. More on that in a minute. And the bus driver said, "This is bus number 27. Make sure you get on. We'll see you in 20 minutes. And I didn't pay any attention because it was just one bus. And I went and got an order of fries and gravy, which were pretty awful and cost me $15. I only ate about a third of them, but that's not the purpose of this story. So then I went back and I saw my bus driver standing outside the bus, and I had my headphones on, and he said something to me, but I just kind of nodded, and I got on the bus, and somebody was sitting in my seat. That's weird. I hadn't left anything on my seat, so it was fair game, but okay, a bunch of new passengers. I don't recognize these passengers, but I went farther back and sat down, and then he came on, and he came up to me, and by the look on his face, I thought, I better take my headphones off. What is he saying to me? He said, "Are you going to Edmonton?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, you're on the wrong bus. You're over there." And the reason I was confused, aside from being obtuse and having my headphones on, was that he switched with the other driver. So he was driving back to Edmonton, and then the new driver was continuing on to Saskatoon. I am so lucky that he came and talked to me, because he could have easily missed it. But I didn't notice the second bus there. So isn't that a fascinating story? So yes, I'm a piece of work, I am. I have joyous news on the Patreon front. I was approached by a young woman who I haven't gotten clearance how to refer to her by first name or where she lives. So all I'm going to say is that she's a young woman somewhere in Canada. She has supported me periodically, just with sending me money, and it's been like chunks of money, and I really, really appreciate it. And so she contacted me the other day and said, "I'd really like to support you on Patreon, but can I do an annual subscription, like just pay once a year for the whole year?" I thought, well, I don't know if Patreon allows that, but I found out they do, so I changed my settings, so it's now possible for anyone, current patron, to switch to annual, or a new patron to pay annually from the get-go. So she's done that at the top tier. So that was a big chunk of money. I'm extremely grateful to her, and I'll tell you more about her if I get permission to, but she's wonderful. Thank you so much. I think I'm going to spend some of that money or all of that money on getting a really good microphone. This microphone is great for outdoor videos, but the microphone I use for bite-sized book chats and Zoom chats, it needs to be replaced. So that is something I've wanted for a long time, and now I have the funds to up my audio game. You are welcome, and I've put for a short time only, I've put a bit of a discount on if you pay annually. But this is the thing that makes me a little nervous about offering an annual patronage. What I'm worried about is if somebody in general takes out an annual patronage, and then later they decide, for their own very good reasons, they lost their job, or they got sick and tired of me, or whatever reason, that they wanted to quit halfway through the year or partway through the year. If I had to scrounge up funds to refund them, I don't think I'm obligated to refund them, but I would feel terrible if it would not be like me to not offer a refund if they quit after 6 months. But I'm living so hand to mouth that I don't have savings. So here's the thing that I want to say about annual patronages. You are welcome to take an annual membership. If you think that you'll stick around for at least a year, you're more than welcome. The monthly thing, it's really easy to quit at any time. And then I don't have to do any refunds. But if it would just be, I would be sent into a financial tizzy. I'd probably have to borrow money from my parents if I had to refund $100, or something, because I don't have that kind of money laying around. Does that make sense? Does that sound, am I saying it diplomatically? And my Patreon, the next thing I got to do is redo all of the introductory videos and stuff, because my Patreon stuff, the benefits have evolved, and I haven't kept people updated. So stay tuned for that in the coming weeks. All right. Okay, here's the week in review. I'm your fairy booktube godmother.
You sure are.
Yeah.
Yes, it's thanks to you that I started my own channel.
I get blamed for everything.
I went to one that was also meaningful to me as a writer. a true story.
Oh, I love that book.
Oh, yay. So
it's
this
not
is
on my list, but it sure could have been.
Yeah, it's 1976. The author Sharon Reese died 2016.
Know that.
She is from Longview, Alberta.
Here is a biography of a famous Canadian Indigenous woman that I know almost nothing about, Pauline Johnson. It's called Flint and Feather, The Life and Times of E. Pauline Johnson. And then her real name, I'm going to do my best to try to pronounce it, Teka Hionwake. And the author is Charlotte Gray. And there she is. She was famous in the 19th century, daughter of a Mohawk chief and an English gentlewoman. And I don't even know why she's famous. I believe she was a writer. I think so. Poetry, I think. But I may have that completely wrong. A hushed quality that kept her from pinning her hopes on it. She would not name the baby until it was squirming in her arms. Her daughters did not understand this. Or at least Uzoamaka and Chinyere did not. The youngest, Peculiar, that's the name of this daughter, Peculiar, capital P. The youngest, Peculiar, was too young to understand or not understand. She simply walked in her sister's footsteps and repeated the questions they asked. It wasn't something their mother could explain to them. She did not want them to worry. She herself worried sometimes when her faith faltered. On those occasions, she read herself the letter she'd received from Kaduna, sitting in the darkness of her room. To her right, the curtains were drawn, as though if she let light fall on the brown paper, it would crumble into the dust in her shaking hands. Well, that's quite a powerful opening, and then the next, right after that, is the letter from Kaduna, who I think is her sister, because the letter begins, "Dearest Sister." You have to read the book to find out what it says. Okay, so I have started two. I only said I was going to start one, but I've started two. I've bailed on two, so I have a real sense of accomplishment about that, and I only finished one, which was the audiobook. My first bail was this weird little book, Isobel and Emile, by Alan Reed, that had the kind of hypnotic Gertrude Stein-like prose. Nobody ever told me whether I was off base comparing it to Gertrude Stein. I bailed on it because the pacing was awful. That hypnotic, and then he did this, and using a repetitive patterning of the sentences, occasionally, like I mean 3 times in the first 60 pages, did it actually narrate anything that was interesting? And so by the time I got to, and then the rest of it, 90% of what I was reading was, and he walked down the street. He walked down the street slowly. He looked around into the windows as he walked down the street. There were other people on the street. Like that, you can hear the repetition of words, and it's over, as you read more of it, it becomes hypnotic or sleep-inducing. But 90% of this was just about nothing. It was about people walking down the streets or people in restaurants. And it was depicting nothing but mundanity. And as I said in my Goodreads review, mundanity, when done well, can be a really important part of literature. And I think particularly in collected works by Lydia Sandgren, translated from the Swedish by Agnes Broomé. Boy, there was a lot of mundane stuff in there that was absolutely fascinating. And none of it in here was. None of it. It was so boring and stupid that I bailed. And I bailed very early on this collection of lesbian short stories, Swimmers in Winter by Faye Guenther. I think it just came out a year or two ago. It just wasn't good enough for me. I'm even more of a snob when it comes to short stories than I am about novels. They have to be excellent or I don't want to read them. And if they're not excellent, they're just awful. Like, a good short story is just terrible. So, no. I only like short stories by Alice Munro and Mavis Gallant. And I've read others of more recent writers that are like those in the profound compression where there's a lot being said in a short space. And that wasn't happening here. But only would I say it's awful. It probably would have been a 4-star read. But again, I don't stick around with 4-star books, as I said the other day. I am famous for making pronouncements like that. And I always imagine people like Lindy. But I know Lindy wouldn't be the only one who rolls her eyes when I make these grand pronouncements, these black and white things, because I always, refine it later. And there are certain books that would be 4-star reads that I would finish. But I'm going to bail on more of them because it's a waste of time, as I said before. But there are special situations where, it's by one of my favorite writers, or, often I will read to the end because I think it's going to get better, and then I feel ripped off. If it's only a 4-star read by the end, I do feel ripped off. But, I'll keep reading a few 4-star reads, but less and less is my point. Have I made myself clear? There was evidence of literary talent here. I will follow this writer. The novel I told you I was going to start, I did start. 7 Nights at the Flamingo Hotel by Drew Gummerson. And this was nominated for a Lambda Award, but I can't see anything gay about it yet. Maybe the main character comes out by the end. He's ostensibly straight, about 20 or 30 pages in. It's funny. It's not my kind of humor, so I'm not sure I'll stick with it, but it's very well done. But a comedic novel that doesn't strike my funny bone is a waste of time. And if you want to know what is Sean the Book Maniac's funny bone, well, it's Barbara Pym, E.F. Benson's Map and Lucia. Nothing else that is a funny book strikes my funny bone. I guess the other one that more recently was Peacock by the German writer. I'll put the gif up. I've blanked on her name, but that one didn't make me laugh, but I thought it was really funny. But Barbara Pym and E.F. Benson in Map and Lucia, and they actually made me giggle and laugh. I don't usually laugh. LOL, laugh. I can see that this is funny, but it's not my kind of humor. So for that reason, I may not continue. I may have a bail to tell you about, but it's well done. I'm not going to prematurely bail. So it's set at a Flamingo Hotel, which seems to be in a kind of off-the-beaten-track UK location. And it's about the staff at this hotel, and they're all sleeping with each other and gossiping with each other and down on their luck. They're all kind of sad sacks, and it's not boring. I did not have this on my Pride TBR, but I did put in a request for the audiobook, and when it came in at the library a few days ago, I grabbed it, and I've started it, and it may be my best experience for Pride Month. I'm only 20 or so pages in, but this is one that is a real Marmite book about lesbians. After Sappho by Selby, Wynn, Schwartz. It wasn't nominated for the Booker last year. Long list, I think. And I heard a lot of reviews that said it just wasn't for those particular reviewers. But based on the first 30 pages, it certainly is for me. I don't know much about Selby, Wynn, Schwartz. I think this is her first work of fiction, and she's an academic. And there's a lot of lesbian history in here, but I think the light fictionalizing of it, there's a tone to it that's the audio narrator is helping create for me as I listen while reading. This is an audio text combo. I'm just sucked right in, and I don't know if it's going to continue. There's a little bit about Sappho at the beginning, and you get kind of what she's up to and I can't summarize how she did it. It was done so beautifully, but basically the different fragments of Sappho, that we only have the fragments, but together they tell a whole story, or they resound in a powerful way with those tiny little things all humming together. She said it so much better, but that is what she's up to with all these stories of lesbian history. I think probably specifically lesbian literary history. And I've met 2, maybe 3 fascinating Italian lesbians from the end of the 19th century into the early 20th century that I'd never heard of, and they are real people. Of course, I'm Google reading, and they're just short, bite-sized chapters that are telling a true story and telling it with a concision that vibrates. I am absolutely hooked on this. Because it came out from the same publisher, what is the publisher? Galley Beggar Press, of, what was that awfully long book from the year or two before that? Newburyport. I thought it was going to be like that. It's nothing like that. Not a stream of consciousness that goes on and on with no sentence breaks. No. The bite-sized chapters and little vignettes that, like I say, they really vibrate. I'm enthralled with this so far. I finished one audiobook. That's all I finished this week, and that was just a few hours ago. Everybody in this room will soon be dead, or someday be dead. I always forget the title, but here's the cover gif by Emily Austin. And I enjoyed it. I give it 5 stars. I loved it. I loved things about it. It didn't all completely work for me, but nothing that didn't work, and I would be hard-pressed to articulate what didn't work, detracted from how much I loved it. It was a really unique voice. Gilda, a 20-something atheist lesbian who just has trouble with a lot of things in life, and at least some of those things most people could relate to, but but when you see the totality of the list of things she struggles with, she's a piece of work. She may be on some kind of a spectrum, she may have mental health challenges, I don't know. I just experienced her as a really fascinating character whose foibles cracked me up and made me care about her. So it was not a satire. I freaking hate satirical depictions of people like this. I cared for her more and more, and she makes so many small bad choices, and by the end of the novel, they come, I'm not going to say what happens, but they come to bite her on the butt. It was extremely well done. So I told you a couple of weeks ago as I was getting into it that she accidentally gets a job as a church, as an assistant at the Catholic Church. She's not Catholic. She's lesbian. She doesn't want them to know that she doesn't believe in God, and she's not Catholic, and she's a lesbian, but she needs the money, and she kind of gets the job accidentally, and the woman she replaced died at the age of 87. I found that out later in the audiobook. And I'm not going to spoil that part of the story. It's an important part of the story, but just as I told you, she gets logged into the church email, and there's personal emails for her predecessor. And she doesn't have the heart to tell this elderly friend of her elderly predecessor that she had died. And so she continues a correspondence with her, posing as the dead old woman whose job she had taken. And you can just imagine, right? Just setting yourself up for her. And she doesn't have the heart she doesn't like to hurt people, and she just makes a lot of just insane choices that you can relate to. Yeah, I could see myself not doing it maybe, but considering doing it and talking yourself out of it. And she doesn't. And it's all first person, and she's got relationship stuff and family stuff, and I just found it entertaining and more than entertaining. The perfect balance between the two. The humor and the way I was made to really care about what happened to Gilda. So I recommend it very highly. Emily Austin is a Canadian writer who I'd never heard of until I heard about this book, and then I heard a lot about this book without realizing that Emily Austin was Canadian. So I certainly would follow her and try whatever she comes out with next. It was delightful. It was weird and delightful. I enjoyed every minute of it. I would say that maybe the way the plot got really complicated at the end for a kind of a climax, maybe not all that. I didn't feel it needed to be so contorted, but I never stopped enjoying it, so that's great. This one was put on my radar by Bill from Nairobi, a frequent guest on Bite Size Book Chats. I'll put a link to our Bite Size Book Chat about this novel in the show notes. So I'm going to start the coming week, and yes, I know I'm crazy, 3 books and 1 audiobook. I want to get a few more in for Pride. I'm obviously not going to finish them. The bulk of what I'm reading for Pride will not be finished until next month, the month after that, the month after that. But I want to start 2 more, especially because they're pseudo-buddy reads. I was chatting with Nemeka from Nigeria. He's been on my bite-sized book chats once. We had a great chat about another queer Nigerian novel. And he told me about this one that's a new release that he was looking forward to reading. And I'd never heard of it, and I checked, and it was available at my local bookstore down the street as a new release. I couldn't believe it. So we're going to have a pseudo-buddy read of it. And then he sang a lullaby by, I have to look up that pronunciation. He taught it to me. Just a sec. You know what? I'm going to stop. I have such a small hard drive, is that what you call it on an iPhone? Anyway, memory, whatever it is, hard drive, whatever it's called, on this old iPhone, and I forgot to delete the long video I recorded last night. I was going to do that before. I'm worried about this, if the hard drive or whatever the hell it's called is, the storage is full, that I might lose what I'm doing. So I'm going to stop this, delete the old video, and come back. 1 second. Well, I'm having quite a time of it. When I deleted the file off the iPhone, I got a message that the battery was low. So I'm finishing it on my iPad. Be interesting to compare the audio quality because I don't have a mic that works with the iPad. It's a quite new iPad Pro, but the video quality I think is better. So anyway, okay, and then I checked the pronunciation. So this novel is And Then He Sang a Lullaby by Annie Kayode Somtochukwu. Annie Kayode Somtochukwu. And he is a award-winning Nigerian writer and queer liberation activist. And that's all I know about him, and that's all I need to know. And it's about what love and freedom cost in a society steeped in homophobia. Nemaka and I will be having a Zoom chat about this novel, a pseudo-buddy read type of Zoom chat, fairly early in July. I can't wait. Similarly, Dan, formerly of the Weird Book Club, and I are starting our next pseudo-buddy read, and I'm going to take my sweet time with this. I'm going to take 2 or 3 months probably to read this, but this is a debut queer novel from India. One Small Voice by Santanu Bhattacharya. This was on my most anticipated 2023 releases. I have it. I think it's only available in the UK. That's where I ordered my copy. Dan was able to interlibrary loan a copy. It's chunky. It is, well, it's almost 400 pages. Not terribly chunky, but chunky for me, with all the books I'm reading. Looking forward to getting into it. Not the audiobook, but the last of the 3 books is a novella that I signed out on a whim from the library. Never heard of it. My eye is always drawn to the book's authors that I've never heard of. And so here is a novel by a man who has a very Italian-sounding name, born in Buenos Aires in 1964, and lives in Bordeaux, France. So I'm not going to try to use any of the demonyms. I'm not going to try to put those together. Like to learn more about him later, but Eduardo Berti, An Ideal Presence. I forgot to name the translator. I'm not sure from which language, but the translator is Daniel Levin Becker. Short little novella. The concept is similar to that Catherine Scanlon novella that I read, something about Kick the Latch, in that this is based on conversations and interviews he's had with people, and then he wrote their story in a thinly fictionalized way. And the people that he's writing about, I don't know if he's a doctor or what he is, but he did a residency at a hospital in France in the palliative care department. And this is a thinly fictionalized story about the people working there. Nurses, nursing aides, doctors, administrators, social workers and volunteers, and obviously patients. I'll tell you more about it next week. And finally, oh dear. Because I brought the iPad for reference and was planning to film on the iPhone, which I did film most of it, I had a screenshot of the audiobook I'm planning to do, and I don't remember the title. So I'll just tell you the author's name, which I do remember. Danny Ramadan, and it's his latest novel. He is a Syrian-Canadian queer writer who I've never read, and his latest novel, there's the cover gif, I could get from the library. So that will be also sneaking that in to at least get a start on during Pride Month. I'll tell you more. Foghorn Echoes, have I remembered? Is that what it's called? Foghorn Echoes. I believe it's about queer characters in both Syria and Canada, but I've forgotten that too. So I'll tell you more about it next week. All right, well, this has been quite a dog's breakfast of a Friday Reads. I hope that it all hung together in a certain eccentrically charming way for you all. Thanks for watching.